This is a global skills podcast, conversations that shape the future of work and learning. We're exploring how we close the skills gap and build a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. From education to business, connecting people, ideas, and opportunities that drive change. It's about collaboration, curiosity, and creating real impact today. Because every skill learned brings us one step closer to a more inclusive world. The Global Skills Podcast, where learning and opportunity come together.
Today's guest has spent nearly 3 decades at the heart of Microsoft, navigating every major wave of transformation, from the rise of the internet to cloud, and now the acceleration of AI. Simon Lambert served as Chief Learning Officer at Microsoft UK, leading the national skilling strategy for customers, partners, employees, and future generations. But this isn't just a story about technology, it's about people. Simon has championed the shift from simply using AI to becoming what he calls agent bosses, leaders who work alongside intelligent tools with curiosity, confidence, and purpose. He's helped drive a Guinness World Record breaking AI skills initiative and has been at the forefront of shaping what frontier firms look like in practice. After 28 years at Microsoft, Simon recently stepped into a new chapter, grounded in lifelong learning and the belief that creating opportunity for others is one of the most meaningful contributions you can make in any career. Today, we're diving into leadership in the age of AI, building cultures of learning, and how to move from hype to habits. Simon, you're very welcome to the show.
Thank you. What a lovely introduction. I really appreciate that. Lovely to be here. Thank you.
So I love to ask any guest about how they ended up in the role that they're in, simply because I think a lot of young people are trying to navigate what paths they can now do. But I think it's a lovely story as well to understand, how did you become Chief Learning Officer at Microsoft UK?
I think it was fundamentally grounded in recognizing the individual stories that people have. And so, right from when I did my first job after graduating university, I became what was then called a lifestyle advisor. And at the time, it was when they were running schemes like GP referrals, exercise on prescription, and having just done a degree in sport science, I was given this opportunity to work in a local authority where people were sent to me to effectively being given exercise plans to help them deal with whatever it was that they were facing, whether that be obesity or hypertension or stress or whatever it may be. And what that taught me very early in my career is everybody has a story. And actually, having a curiosity around what that story is really helps you kind of connect with them on a much deeper level. And so when I kind of eventually ended up working in technology and then taking leadership roles in technology, it was always really the people piece that gave me the energy and allowed me to be curious about what those stories were. So eventually, having spent many years running different parts of the organization, commercial businesses, large P&Ls, I was invited to take on this responsibility because I think there is a recognition that learning really is a commercial tool, right? You can absolutely drive commercial impact through the delivery of learning and skills. And so I was asked to come in and effectively sort of rethink about how we could use learning as a mechanism for driving growth across the business, connecting it directly with the commercial priorities of the organization. And over the last 6 years, I've spent time working at Microsoft in the UK specifically to really help try and address that challenge. And it's been an incredible journey, and I've learned an awful lot, met some amazing people, and really kind of exposed myself to that connection of purpose to actually impact. Because as I used to say to my team, we are in the business of helping change people's lives. And it was a phenomenally powerful position to be in, to be able to kind of really do that and help impact on both organizations and the individuals within them. So it's been a fantastic journey. But yes, as you say, I'm taking a little breather.
And I think how you've described the role of learning within the corporation, I think many heads of learning would like companies to get to that point where they really see the correlation between investment in learning and impact. But what challenges do you think are faced there when you're trying to demonstrate the commercial impact of learning? And were there any that you were able to implement that helped that C-suite conversation and grow L&D budgets for future years?
I mean, I think having worked in technology for the last 30 odd years, I think there's probably sort of three main challenges that I was having to think about in the context of my role as CLO. The first one was really about the increasing pace of technological change. I mean, if you just take a moment to think about how fast things have moved in the last few years. I mean, technology wise, like a single modern GPU, these processing units that are specialized processing units specifically to deliver sort of large scale parallel processing for AI. One of those can perform over 1 trillion operations per second. Something that would have had to have done that, a supercomputer, 15 years ago. So just the technological change in the technology itself is just unbelievably fast. And you combine that with the adoption of technology as well, right? If you just go to ChatGPT, didn't it reach like 100 million users in its first 2 months? Something like that, I think, which is the fastest adoption, I think, of any consumer technology in history, even faster than things like Instagram, Netflix, those types of applications. And that pace is how organizations are now trying to kind of learn. They're trying to learn at that type of pace. And that in itself has an implication on skills when you think about it, because I mean, even the World Economic Forum, or other big organizations are effectively coming out saying that, a half-life of a skill is now less than 5 years. And in fact, I think when you look at the half-life of a technology skill, I think even IBM and their global study was saying it could be anywhere between 12 and 18 months. So effectively what that means is half of what you learn today is irrelevant in 5 years. Or if you're in technology, something that you've learned today is going to be redundant in 18 months, which means that organizations are constantly running to stand still. So that kind of speed of technological change, especially obviously in the context of working in an organization like Microsoft, was very much at the fore. And all the conversations I had with other organizations were actually saying, my God, how do we keep a pace with this? So that's the first kind of big chunky challenge I see. I think the second one, we know AI has been around for many, many years, right? I mean, AI is not new to the industry, but generative AI is fundamentally reshaping not just jobs really, but it's also reshaping how people learn. And so if you just look at Microsoft's Work Trend Index, which, is a report that we publish every year, and I have to be careful because clearly I don't work at Microsoft anymore. And I keep saying we, so, that's 28 years that I need to get out of my system. But that report said that 85% of knowledge workers say that AI is helping them learn. And even the World Economic Forum, again, their job report is saying something like 44% of workers are going to have some sort of AI skills needed by 2027 in every single job. So AI isn't just changing the work people are doing, it's changing how they're learning to do it, because it's enabling them effectively to do things that they yet haven't mastered, which is accelerating that learning curve. And the other thing it's doing, therefore, is it's democratizing skills. It's democratizing skills, and it's no longer just about the technological few within an organization. They're at the heart of business change. It's now about the many. Every person in the organization needs to understand how to take advantage of this new technology, meaning that learning is right at the forefront of any adoption and change management process for a new technology, which also means that learning is at the heart of organizational transformation. Now, that is something that we as learning leaders really need to bang home, because that makes us a strategic component of an organization. And then I think the third thing that we are facing when we look down at learning today is organizations generally, and I think you'll probably agree with this, organizations generally are not future focused when it comes to skills. Typically, they don't know what skills they have, what skills they need, and how wide is that gap. And so that therefore means that organizations can't really build kind of a clear forward-looking skills strategy. They end up then reacting to shortages instead of anticipating them, which has an impact because by the time the skills gap is emerging, it's already too late, which means that recruitment processes become very expensive, which means that reskilling becomes urgent, and then sometimes transformation can stall as a result of it. So you asked what are the things that really I was having to deal with in the context of that organization. And it's really those three. It's like, okay, technology is moving really fast. How do we as learning leaders stay up with it? Goodness me, AI and generative AI is changing the way in which we work and learn. So what does that mean? And thirdly, we don't really know what we need because of all of these things that are moving so quickly. So how do you get ahead to solve the problem before you're then chasing your tail to kind of recover from something that's already happened? That effectively were the three things that I was worried about most of the time.
I listened into a really amazing PhD presentation this morning by Greta, who I'm going to tag, and she's done an incredible analysis of skills. And one of the elements she was coming across was around exactly what you said. Organizations, they don't understand their skills gap. And this is a live skills need. It's not like what we need today will be different in a month's time. And one analysis that she had was that companies are now realizing that you can't just go to recruitment to say, fill these skills gaps, because in many cases, the skills don't exist yet. So now you have to work with what you have. And if you have high attrition rates, the first thing you need to do is address those rather than thinking, let's make 20% of the workforce redundant and hit the number for the CFO. Actually, let's really understand the skills of the workforce and who could transfer their skills, who could upskill, reskill. What do you think about that?
I'm a massive believer in upskilling organizations and giving people the opportunity to pursue different pathways. I've done that myself. I started in marketing and then I went into various different roles and ended up in learning. So I'm a massive believer in helping people try and identify. And again, this comes back to my original point, right? Which is everybody has a story. So if you can start to get to understand what that story is and people are willing to share, that story, suddenly you might find you got someone that's an absolute whiz around data and they just haven't been in a position to be able to apply that. And then suddenly actually, you know what? I really need a data analyst. So how do we help you get on that journey? You might have somebody that's got this absolute passion for creativity and really sort of applying themselves to big business challenges and they're working in an operational role. And so it's kind of, well, how do you find that out about them? And then how do you really unlock that opportunity and potential in them to apply them into a planning role or whatever it may be? So I'm a massive believer in, there's a huge amount of talent which is uncovered within your workforce. And organizations who can really start to kind of uncover that will be able to then redeploy some of those skills as they're thinking about what are the biggest challenges I need to fix first? Where do I go get that talent? Start with your own organization. Start with what you've got, because I tell you, you'll be surprised how many people have got hidden talents within the context of your business.
Quick question. Do you actually know what skills exist across your organizations today? Or are decisions still being made on job titles, CVs, and assumptions around who can be reskilled and upskilled? You see, as AI reshapes work and organizations really face that pressure to cut costs, the real challenge isn't just skills gaps. It's understanding which skills are transferable and which can be redeployed into the future with a bit of upskilling. So for the listeners of Global Skills Podcast, Abodu, our sponsor, has created this free Skills AI readiness assessment. It gives leaders clarity in just 3 minutes. It shows skills gaps, automation exposure, and where future-ready capabilities already exist within your business. No data upload, no preparation, just clarity for the future of your organization. Visit abodu.com/global skills podcast. Now, back to the episode.
I've touched on other episodes, but I'm very interested to get your perspective because obviously LinkedIn Learning, LinkedIn, huge skills databases, huge learning content databases. And a lot of what I'm reading recently is now this consolidation happening in the marketplace. And this idea of let's just give the workforce thousands of courses is changing because the adoption rate is not as high as it may have been at the very beginning. Where do you see this going in terms of learning creation to meet the skills gaps of the future?
Well, you know what? That really actually is a great segue into, so what's the answer? So if they were the three problems that I was identifying, so how do we address them? How do we kind of overcome them? And I actually feel like learning leaders need to become quite iconoclastic about this, right? Because I actually think we need to be challenging everything that's gone before us, because I believe that we need to really think about redefining what we mean by learning. And so I think if you look at redesigning learning to be fast, agile, human and AI based, suddenly we've got to really think about, well, what does it mean? So most organizations treat learning, I still say most treat learning as something that you do, right? You go on a course, you attend a workshop, you follow a program, you sign up for a learning pathway. It's episodic, it's scheduled. And often, and I've listened to your podcast, people saying, I do my learning at the end of the day, or I do my learning at the weekend. It's part of your job. It's fundamentally part of what you do every day. Learning is a permanent requirement of work. I've said that time and time again. But in a world where the half-life of the skills is such that it could be redundant, that particular skill could be redundant in 12 to 18 months. You have to have learning as a capability in its own right. You have to be agile in the way that you take on board skills. You have to apply and adapt those skills quickly at the pace at which the world is now demanding. And so I used to get so frustrated, Vanessa, when I was working in the corporate space, because one of the biggest challenges we all faced is, I don't have time for learning. You look at the LPI, their research still back up. That's one of the biggest challenges. And the thing is, that's because of the way in which people define what they mean by learning. Because as well as I do, everybody is learning all the time. They just don't recognize it as such. So that conversation you'll have with a colleague about how you might deal with a particular customer engagement, that's learning. That email that you've just seen that you thought, that's a really well worded email that I'm going to really think about how I could weave that kind of language into how I'm communicating with my customer. That's learning. And so you've got to have this kind of muscle, which kind of goes, actually, you know what, it's not about going on a course. It's not about going to a program. It's learning and taking all those small moments, all those micro moments that you have during the course of the day, and recognizing them as learning. And that's why I think we, as learning leaders, need to really challenge the norm and say, no, learning is not just the traditional sense, right? It's moving really fast. And it's being part of and becoming such a core part of any adoption and change management process. I've worked in a number of transformations, as you identified in the introduction. And I think the turning point wasn't the technology itself. It was fundamentally the learning. It was when people were able to embrace and understand how to apply themselves with this new technology, which was based on fundamentally taking the time to learn it. And when learning is at the heart of change, adoption accelerates and capability increases. That's my belief. And so this is why I believe learning is a strategic function, not support function, not something that should be embedded in the organization. It's right at the heart of the organization. So I feel quite strongly about this because I think people continue to treat learning in the same way. You've had some people on your podcast that are challenging the way in which people think about education. How do you actually educate the future workers? I still think that organizational learning also needs to think differently about how they educate their learners as well, because I think the speed of which we're living in and the change that we're seeing, we won't be able to keep up otherwise. So redefining what we mean by learning is something that I feel really strongly about, because I think it really will move the needle on how people perceive learning as a function within an organization. So that's a really big, chunky thing. But I think, and dare I say it, Vanessa, I think we need to talk about the C word. I think we need to talk about specifically the learning C word, or more specifically, the learning C words. Now, I've come up with 4 words, C words, that I think actually describe what modern learning actually feels like when you get it right. And I think as a model, these are really important when organizations think about moving and modernizing their approach to learning. So the first C word is conversational. Learning needs to be conversational. And it's a dialogue, right? AI is sort of making things possible that we've never seen before. You've seen that through generative AI. People can ask questions, they can explore ideas, they can challenge assumptions, and they can get immediate feedback. So learning agents is something, agentic AI enables us to have learning agents. And in the context of organizations, I've seen success where agents are used to help people get skilled around a narrative or a proposition or a selling technique. And people have actually responded incredibly positively to it because of psychological safety associated with dealing with an agent, which means that they are not being judged and they know they're not being judged. And so it's really revelationary to see people engage through an agent, through an agentic approach with learning, because they apply themselves in a way that they wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable doing if it was talking to you. So if you said to a guy, right, I'm here to coach you. I want you to tell me what's your pitch to customer on product X. Goodness. Well, I'll start here and I'll start there, and they'll be constantly looking at you and they're worried about how your reaction and trying to read When it's an agent, they can actually get it wrong as many times as they like. They can get feedback real time about how they can improve it. I think conversational learning is going to be the way forward.
Just on that point, then, the likes of, I won't necessarily name names, but the huge content libraries, is that over if we're heading into an era of learning through conversation and really agile and customized?
And actually, that again brings me nicely onto my second C word, which is learning needs to be contextual. And I think not just delivered in the flow of work, because we know that's really always important, but tailored to the moment, the role, the skill. Relevance is really what drives retention. So I think there's a role for having these content libraries to enable people to capture all of the different scenarios that could be coming up, but it's how you surface that at the right time and in the right context. And that's where I think AI can play a fantastically positive role. The third C is for me, and I've talked to you about this before, I live in a very creative household and it's creative, right? I think learning needs to be creative. And I'm not just talking about a stimulant for learners, right? I'm not just talking about giving people the opportunity to be creative themselves because, we know people learn best when they're making, they're testing, they're adopting, they're kind of in it, right? And AI tools are opening up opportunities for people to do this, to sort of prototype, to experiment, problem solve, and that's brilliant. But I actually think it's incumbent upon the learning leaders to also be creative in creating experiential learning and memorable learning experiences, because I think that's really important. And I think people just get bored, right? They get bored of traditional learning. So how can you create it in a way which is really different and memorable? And I think that's really important. And I think the final one is continuous. And, learning has to be continuous and not once a year. It needs to be habitual. And we talked about, changing habits is hard, but actually when you're adopting a technology like generative AI, what I learned was you actually need to have a significant behavioral change, which is redefining your habits and how you work, and micro learning nudges, sort of AI powered support, keep skills fresh and keep people moving forward. So I think those four C's, conversational learning, contextual learning, creativity in learning, and continuous learning, are fundamentally important when I think about modernizing and really getting ready for how learning needs to evolve in this world of AI.
The first time you told me about the C words, you did shock me. Yeah, I think it's beautifully laid out, actually. And I love the fact that you're touching on the human skills, the creativity side. And having worked in recruitment and learning for 2 decades, I think one of the things that has frustrated me a little bit about corporates is that they've very much leveraged this archaic type of taxonomy where we'll take job titles and we'll take keywords and we'll look really more at the hard skills. And now I know we've gone back and forth on, like, we leverage a skills ontology and it's game changed our ability to skills gap and forecast skills and recommend learning within a passport. But we touched on the fact that skills ontologies have to evolve again because there's this spectrum of human skills that are now being recognized. But corporations, as they stand today, don't really have the framework to support that. So, just interested in your opinion around the evolution of skills ontologies and the role that enterprises should play. Should they be doing heavy integrations between big systems, or should they be looking at building an ontology and leveraging an ontology that represents the full spectrum of the human workforce within their business?
I'll come back to my point around how AI is democratizing skills across an organization, because I think gone are the days where it's just going to be the IT department that really fundamentally help drive business transformation. It's every single person within the organization, which means that every single person within the organization needs to hone and build their skills to be applicable into that business transformation. And yeah, I do think there's some challenges around the way in which people are defining skills. I actually get a little frustrated because, having been around for a few years, we've had a skills problem for many, many, many years. If you go to any government kind of work stream, we've been talking, there's a skills problem. What are we going to do to it? There's a skills gap. How do we enhance it? Many organizations, really, really good organizations, have come off the back of that. But I get a little bit frustrated with is we're always trying to fix today's problem when really what we want to try and do is get ahead with tomorrow's, right? So how do you start to predict what skills are going to be needed in the future so you can start get ahead of the problem? And I think AI is definitely reshaping roles. And I think probably faster than most organizations can redesign them. I think learning systems are still built for sort of slow episodic based learning. And I think they need to really think about how they can advance to meet the needs of I guess what Microsoft would call the frontier firm in the context of AI. I think there's no universal language for skills, even within a single organization. Very rare to see a single taxonomy that's consistently applied across engineering, across sales, marketing, all the functions. And I think globally, there's no universally recognized language around skills and what that effectively means. And I think you've got new things emerging like prompt engineering, you've got governance, data ethics, everything's moving quickly. So actually, I think it's going to be hard to have a system that can stay up to speed with the advancement that we're seeing in technology and then what that's doing around the learning and skills industry. But I think that organizations really need to think about the role that everyone plays in driving a business transformation. And therefore, to answer your specific question, yes, I think there needs to be a clearly and well-defined approach to every role within an organization to get them to the point where they can apply themselves in an AI business. And so I think the work you're doing around your ontology is really encouraging.
Thank you very much. I would love to touch on the next generation, which I know, well, we're both parents. We've talked about how challenging it's been for young people to navigate not only future careers if we don't know what they're going to be, but what courses they should take post school. And even in school, is the educational system meeting the needs? We kind of know the answer is no, but just as a parent, what are your feelings and thoughts about what any educators that might be listening to this episode, what they could be doing to stay connected to industry and hopefully increase the chances of employability for the young people?
This probably brings me to my sort of third point around what can we do about it. And I don't want you to think I don't have all the answers. These are just opinions based on my experience of working in the industry and working with many different organizations in the UK who are all facing very similar challenges. But I do believe that we need to recognize the symbiotic relationship between technology and humans, even more than we've had in the past. And so what I mean by that is we spend a lot of time talking about AI skills, and they are fundamentally important. I think every young person is being exposed to these, and they need to be exposed to the right ones. So how do you identify what's real and what's not real? How do you look for hallucinations? How do you check on privacy, ethics? These are really important skills that people need. They matter. But I actually think the shift is learning how humans and machines can work together even better. I actually don't think the future is either artificial intelligence or human intelligence. It's actually almost a combination of that. It's almost like augmented intelligence, right? And we need to recognize this relationship. And we need to build resonances between these human capabilities and generative AI. I mean, generative AI gives us unprecedented scale, right? Speed, the ability to generate content, ideation, pattern recognition, all these brilliant things that it does. But it's humans that fundamentally bring judgment, empathy, creativity, clarity, leadership, and more importantly, who decide what does and doesn't change. And I believe that the organizations that are going to thrive are the ones that design for this partnership between people and generative AI to elevate each other. I am a big believer in the power of human agency. I am the big believer in everybody has an innate creativity, and our job as leaders is to try and unlock that. And sometimes generative AI is a tool that can enable that. And that's great. And I think we should be recognizing that, again, that relationship is important. But it doesn't take away from the fact that AI can, accelerate learning, but humans are the ones that give it meaning. AI can accelerate capability, but it's humans that are able to create and drive culture. Let's not lose sight of that. And I truly believe it's easy to say, let's give everyone the skills around AI about how to use the technology. And yes, we absolutely need to do that. What I fundamentally believe is also, how do you lead in a world of AI? What are the human skills that you need to be able to do that? You mentioned at the top around the skill to be able to lead a team where some people will be human beings and some people will be agentic based AI bots or agents. that in itself is really demonstrates the symbiotic nature of which the two come together, because you could be well leading a team of 15 people, 7 of which are human beings and 8 of which are agents. And you still need to figure out how to do that. And I don't think anybody really has figured out how to do that. But I don't think we can underestimate the importance of human skills, human intellect in the application of leadership in AI. So that's me on my high horse a little bit, but I think we can't lose sight of the fact human skills are fundamental to leadership in a world of AI. And we need leaders, who can think with AI, question AI, guide teams through AI enabled change. We need human leaders to kind of create that bridge between fear and confidence. And I think without that, we're going to lose sight of how we can take this technology and really apply it in a way which benefits everybody. We talk a lot about leaving people behind. This is a technology that should not be leaving people behind, but it's humans who are at the heart of how we make that true. So coming back to your question around young people, I think we shouldn't lose sight of the importance of somebody to be able to communicate with another person, another human being on a human to human level, being able to look somebody in the eye and have a conversation about something meaningful. We shouldn't lose sight of the ability for people to apply themselves to solve problems in a collective group. When I was at Microsoft, we did this really interesting piece of work with the Learning Performance Institute where we brought together learning leaders and we asked them to give them sight of what Copilot could do and fundamentally to help them start thinking about application of AI in their business. And it was really only when we brought these learning leaders in, we gave them access to Copilot, and when we gave them some problems to solve, what we saw was that human collaboration, leveraging generative AI as a tool to solve problems was where the magic happened. And I fundamentally believe that's going to be the case moving forward.
Really interesting how you've sort of described the future, and I think you're very right around the lack of investment in preparing leaders for what will be a new type of hybrid working in the years to come. We have a closing tradition for this episode where I ask 2 questions. You can answer both or one. The first question is there a skill that you used to use when you were younger that you don't use anymore that you'd like to? And then the second question is, I guess for people starting out in their career or those that have been made redundant or they've taken redundancy and they're thinking, well, what shall I do next? How do I upskill, reskill effectively and increase my chances? What advice would you give them?
I think I was probably a lot braver when I was younger because I didn't know any different. And actually, I think bravery and risk taking is something that everyone should really continue to hone that skill. Do what you think is right. Be brave about it. I think is something that I would encourage certainly young people to think about. And actually, to be honest, I don't think young people generally lack bravery as much as perhaps we do when we get to a certain age. And I think this is an interesting one because I see it in my kids and you may in yours. Don't judge your success by others. And I think it's very easy to get into an organization or to get into any role really and look at other people and think, wow, they're more successful than me. When really you want to be judging your success by your own development and by the pace at which you want to go. And so in the world of social media, it's very easy to try and live your life vicariously through others. And so I would encourage people, don't let others judge your success. You be the judge of that, right? And then in helping people, I think there's a whole host of resources out there that individuals can use. Certainly Microsoft have a whole host that I'm very aware of, but there's been a new AI skills hub that's just been launched by the UK government to try and encourage people to give them access to AI skills. I know other technological vendors do them as well. And so I think if you just went online and searched for like AI skills, where do I go? I mean, LinkedIn Learning. And obviously I'm coming at this from having spent the last 28 years in the Microsoft ecosystem. So I'm referring to Microsoft partners, but there are many others. But I think a good place to start is to say, I want to learn the fundamentals of AI. What do I need to do? And I think that AI fluency piece, just being aware of what does prompt engineering mean? How do you write a good prompt? How do I make sure my data is protected online? How do I make sure that I'm not putting myself or my business or my friends at risk? They're basic fluency skills that I would suggest everybody needs.
I have thoroughly enjoyed this episode. I kind of knew I would coming in because we've had many conversations, both in person and online. But I think our passions align when it comes to democratization and access to learning for all. I'm very excited to see where you go with your C words. I in, in fact, many companies.
Oh, be careful there. Yeah.
And I know we have an announcement coming in a couple of weeks as well on something that we're looking at doing together. But I just want to say thank you, Simon, for the work that you've done in Microsoft. And I think for the work you're about to do, whatever the future holds. And thank you for being a brilliant guest.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Whether you're leading a business, shaping education, planning your next career move, or just starting out, you're part of a global conversation about how we learn, work, and grow. If you've enjoyed this episode, tap subscribe so you never miss the latest insights. And if you've a moment, leaving a quick rating really helps people find the show. For early access to new episodes, event invitations, and the chance to connect with others driving real change, join the community at globalskillspodcast.com. The future of skills belongs to all of us. Proudly sponsored by Abodu, empowering organisations and educators with world-class skills technology to build a better future for everyone.